Okay, so now that we've reminded ourselves about trig and inverse functions, we're now going to work on derivatives and integrals of inverse functions. And some theorems are given for the derivatives of these functions. So if you would, write down the derivative of sine inverse of u, okay? And then cosine inverse of u and tangent inverse of u. So I'll give you a few minutes to pause that, jot those down. And I also want you to finish out with the other three trig functions on the next page. So these are just by theorems in your textbook that were given to you. Okay, so after you've written them all down, I do want to make one note. Your textbook uses this presentation of the formulas where I use ddx and u prime. They're equivalent, so be able to transition either way. So it's the derivative, sine inverse of u, 1 over u, and then this has the derivative of u represented like this. So we're probably going to use this representation of it more often in our notes, but don't let it confuse you if you see this in your textbook. Okay, so let's see some examples. Find each derivative. So we're given y equals sine inverse of x squared. Let's pull up our formula. Okay, pull it up over here to the side. So we're going to be working with this one, so it's at sine inverse. What we want to do is we want to determine u. So first of all, we're going to let u be, what do you think we'll let u be? X squared. We can see our definition uses u prime, so we're going to need the derivative at some point. So we'll let u be x squared. What would du be? Just going to be 2x. Okay, so now let's plug this information, this u and du, over into here. So that's just going to give us, I'm going to bring down y prime. It's going to be 2x. So du is the u prime. That's the same thing as u prime. Where's my cursor? Right there. So that's the 2x. Okay, then I'll have square root. The 1 is just a 1. Minus, now what would u squared be? I'm going to write u, actually, u is x squared. So I'm going to write u, and then I want to square that. Let's simplify. 2x over 1 minus, what's x squared squared? Just x to the 4th. And that's going to be our first derivative. Okay, so the next one is y equals cosine inverse of 3 over x squared. Pull the formula, but the next thing we need to do is just start with our u. And we're going to let this 3 over x squared be u, and it may be helpful to rewrite it with the negative exponent. Okay, so u is 3 over x squared, or that can be rewritten as 3x to the negative 2. That makes it a little easier to do the derivative, or this is our, we could also say it as u prime. Okay, which would give us what? Negative 6x to the negative 3. Which if we simplify that, just so we have all versions of it, 6 over x to the 3rd. Now what we want to do is plug this information that we just found into this formula here. Okay, so I just pulled it over to the right so that we can have some room over here. So I'm going to say y prime is going to be, I have a negative right here. I have a negative. Then I need u prime. What was our u prime? Negative 6 over x to the 3rd over, what do we get? 1 square root of 1 minus, and then we have u squared again. Well, u was 3 over x squared, and that is squared. Okay, if we simplify this a little bit, negative times a negative is a positive. I'll leave this as my numerator. I simplify my denominator. 3 squared is 9. X squared squared is x to the 4th. Now, if I multiply this by the reciprocal, then that would just be 1 over square root. What's in the square root? I'll just do like this. So then I'll say 1 over everything that's in the square root. So 1 minus 9 over x to the fourth. And I'll go back in and plug this in just a minute. So let's see how that simplifies. Okay, so it's clear that everything in the bottom is going to reduce and everything in the denominator. Now let's multiply straight across. So that would just be 6 times 1 is 6. And I'm just going to have x cubed times this radical 1 minus 9 over x to the fourth. And this will be our y prime. Okay, so that's our first two. Let's look at one with a tan inverse next. Okay, y equals tan inverse of 3x. Let me pull my formulas over here so we can be working with this one. What's the first thing we want to do? Label u, which is going to be 3x, and then what's u prime, or the derivative of u? Just 3. So once we have this information, we're ready to plug it into this formula, and the tangent ones are not too bad. So y prime is just going to be u prime on the top, which is 3 in the numerator, and then I'll have 1 plus u squared in the denominator, and that's going to simplify to 1 plus 9x squared. Okay, cotangent y equals cotangent inverse of the square root of x. I'm going to go pull those formulas while you work on labeling u. It may help to rewrite it to the 1/2 power. You go ahead and work on that part. Okay, so here's our cotangent inverse. So we're going to be working with this formula, but let's go ahead. You are working on u while I was away. So you have, this is just going to be, u is going to be the square root of x, or how else could we write that? X to the 1/2. So what would u prime be? 1/2 x to the negative 1/2, or if we simplify the version, it would be 1 over 2x to the 1/2, or 2 squared of x, like that. Okay, now let's take this cotangent inverse formula here and work with that. So y prime equals a negative u prime. So I'm going to have negative 1 over 2 square root of x. Then that's going to be divided by 1 plus our u, which is the square root of x, squared. Right? Make sure we got everything transitioned. I'm going to try to just move this over here for a minute. Let's just take the extra step. I know it's going to be to simplify our denominator. I'm just going to bring this down. And our denominator is just going to be 1 plus, what would that be? What's the square root squared? Just x. 1 plus x. Okay, so if I multiplied this denominator by the reciprocal, that would be 1 over 1 plus x, right? Do the same thing in the numerator, then we could just simplify. Of course, down here, this would simplify with this, and we would just get negative 1 times a positive 1 is a negative 1, and then we're just going to have 2 square root of x times 1 plus x.